what's your current assessment of the U.S. housing market?
Yeah, it's not good. I mean, right now there's absolutely no home buyers. We're at a close to a 10-year low in home buyer demand in the US housing market right now. And in certain cities, home buyer demand is down 50% year over year. We have half as many buyers today that we did a year ago. And of course, that is now causing prices to go down. It took a couple months for these price declines to get going, but we are now firmly in an era where home prices are going down in America. And people really need to start understanding that if they buy a house today, it's very likely that the value of that house 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road is going to be lower than it is today. And certain cities have already seen very, very big price declines.
Put yourself back at January 1st of this year, 2022. And I tell you that mortgage rates are going to go from, 3, maybe even a little under 3, as we saw in 2021, to up to close to 7. I think mortgage rates right now are around like 6.3, 6.4, whatever. But if I told you mortgage rates were going to do that over the course of the year, just mathematically, what type of price correction would you have expected, just given the mathematical inverse relationship between mortgage rates and home prices?
Sure. I would have expected just the mathematical relationship, a 30 to 40% decline in home prices to bring back affordability into the housing market, given the big increase in mortgage rates.
We are likely in the very early innings, maybe still inning 1 of the actual price correction for the market.
That's right. And I just want to jump in here, Adam, and say, yes, higher mortgage rates is pushing buyers out, but a lot of the buyers have already purchased. From a demographic standpoint, there simply aren't enough home buyers left in the US housing market. And that's a situation that's going to worsen as the recession gets worse as well. So, this increase in mortgage rates has had a huge impact in 2022. But as you said, this is inning 1, inning 2 of a multi-year housing correction that has a lot of different things going on behind it.
Articles that have said that a lot of them have a ton of buyer's remorse at this point. They felt like they kind of got in because of FOMO and they were being pressured. If you don't get in now, you're going to be priced out of the market. And now they're watching the market cool off. At the same time, they're realizing that, like, wow, homeownership isn't exactly the dream I thought it was. And a lot of them overextended themselves. And so they've got very high mortgage payments, and they're now realizing that there are maintenance costs and all sorts of other issues that come along with owning a house. Was it primarily FOMO? Was it any other factor?
Sure. I mean, it was FOMO. It was the pandemic, right? I mean, it was logical for a while there in 2020 and 2021 to want to move out of your apartment in the city and go buy a house in the suburbs or a rural area. That made a lot of sense during the pandemic, especially with record low mortgage rates. So that induced forward a lot of demand for both home buyers and eventually renters, which we'll talk about later in this video, the decline in renter demand that's occurring right now. And so structurally, there's just not as many people looking to buy, and especially to make that move across America, whether it's from California or New York to Texas or to Florida. There's just not as many people, period, left to make that move right now. And this is how housing cycles work, whether you go to the big housing crash in the mid to late 2000s, or you go to the regional housing crashes we had in the early 90s. It always works like this. The mortgage rates go up, the home builders go crazy, just as the structural buyer demand goes down. And that leaves you with a big housing crash where prices have multiple years of declines ahead.
Interesting. I remember a year and a half ago, I live here in California, lots of stories about how you couldn't get your hands on a U-Haul truck in California to go, move somewhere else because everybody was doing that and they were just in such high demand. And it was incredibly cheap to rent a U-Haul to bring it into California because everybody wanted them here.
That's right.
Are we still seeing those crazy imbalances, or is this all moderating now? Answer that. And then also too, I've heard you say in previous discussions with you that you think eventually this whole great migration that the COVID unlocked may actually start going into reverse as employers start demanding that people start working in the office, and maybe people realize, hey, living out in East wherever now, East remote place isn't all it was cracked up I thought it was going to be.
The inbound buyers from California making $300K who purchased the homes in cash and pushed prices up 50% in 2 years. Well, who's going to now buy that house at a 50% premium. It's not going to be the local home buyer who's making $50,000 a year. And so that means that prices structurally are going to have to go down in many of these markets and go down by a lot more than they have already.
Is there the potential or any signs that we're seeing of almost a reversal? Like some percentage of the folks that fled the big metropolitan areas for these smaller cities or more rural areas changing their mind and coming back, either because they don't like it there or because they have to move back to where the jobs are that can support their lifestyle?
I think we're in the beginning stages of seeing the reversal. So let's just say the slowdown in people moving to those areas, we are well into the slowdown. We are now also just beginning to see the reversal. So when you look at inventory data by zip code, for instance, and by county, the zip codes in the counties in America with the biggest increase in homes just sitting vacant on the market are all of these suburban and rural locations in a Tennessee, in a Utah, in a Phoenix, in a Texas. So that's indicating what we're talking about here. Number one, the slowdown in migration buyers. But then number two, like you just said, we're now seeing people move back to the city, especially of maybe a younger population doing that.
All right, interesting. And we'll have you back on this channel, to be able to give updates here as you see real data. But is your expectation that we will see an increase in a reversal as time goes on here?
I think so, because when you think about the recession, right? When you think about what's happening with remote work, slowly but surely more people are getting called back into the office, and slowly but surely more people are getting laid off. I mean, imagine if someone had a remote job. I'm sure many of your viewers do. And maybe someone had a remote job and they moved from California to Tennessee because their job was remote, and then they got laid off and they don't have any like professional contacts or network in Tennessee. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to move back to California where their family and their professional network is, right? And I think we're going to see more and more of that as this recession gets worse. And we're going to see a trend where people actually want to be in the places where the jobs are, a reversal of what occurred during the pandemic. And I'm not saying remote work is going away forever. Clearly, some element of it is here to stay, but we have clearly passed peak remote work. That is in the rearview mirror. Peak remote work occurred in 2021. Each year from here on out, the amount of remote workers is going to go down. And that's going to have a big impact on which housing markets have the biggest crash.
All right. Well, very, very interesting point. Okay, so before we move off this initial point about mortgage rates, is there any reason that you see to expect relief on mortgage rates, at least in the next year or so, or do you see them as continuing to remain elevated, perhaps even going higher?
I think there's definitely going to be relief on mortgage rates. We're already seeing mortgage rates start to go down from 7.2 to 6.2, still very high. But from what I'm seeing in the trajectory of the economy, in a recessionary environment, interest in mortgage rates on the long end tend to go down. And I know that sounds contrary to what Jerome Powell is saying, right now about how they're going to keep hiking rates and keep rates high. But when you look at long-term bond yields, they're going down, and they indicate that this is going to be a pretty big recession. And eventually, I believe the Fed is going to be forced to pivot, which is going to cause mortgage rates to go down in conjunction with a recession that drives people to buy long-term bonds, which further pushes mortgage rates down. So I wouldn't be surprised by the end of 2023 if the mortgage rate is back down to around 5%, maybe the high 4% range.